1st of October 1989, the Tembu nation gathered at the Bumbane Great Place in the Transkei region of South Africa. They came to pay tribute to a man whose life story is a reflection of one of South Africa's most tragic eras of political history. At a time when the kings and chiefs of South Africa were made pawns of oppression and exploitation, this man chose instead to identify himself with the oppressed people, his people. This is the story of Sabata Dalindyebo, the king of the Tembu nation. According to oral history recited by the Xhosa praise poets, the founder of the Tembu nation was the King Tembu himself. It is estimated that he lived some time prior to the 1300s. Little is known or remembered about the activities of the earliest Tembu kings, but through word of mouth passed from generation to generation, the legitimacy of the Tembu royal throne was protected. In succession, the kings governed over Tembu land in accordance with the will of the people. The king was perceived as a father, a provider, a protector, and defender of the home. Under their guidance, the Tembu nation retained its independence for 15 generations. Meaningful contact between the Tembu nation and the invading British colony from the Cape was only established in the mid-1880s. King Ngangelizwe was persuaded by colonial missionaries to sign a piece of paper asking for British protection against the neighboring nations. It appears unlikely that Ngangelizwe actually understood that under his signature, Tembu land was in fact annexed by Britain. In 1885, the Tembu royal family lost their independence. Over the decades that followed, the Tembu fell alongside with all the other South African nations and became the oppressed subjects of a series of foreign governments. King Sabata Dalindyebo was born in 1928. South Africa was a union. According to the government's land legislation, Tembu land formed a part of a so-called native reserve, known as the Transkei.
Sabata uza emva kwami. Singabantwana baka Osujongilizwe.
Unfortunately, his father died before he was born.
Uzalwa lapha emqhezeni kwindlu ebeke sayibona engasemva ngapha.
Sabata grew up in the care of his uncle at Mqekezweni. According to the Tembu tradition, a young king must not be educated and groomed at home because he might be influenced by enemies with evil plans for the future. Sabata was sent to Clarkbury, another small village about 10 kilometers from his birthplace. He attended school at Clarkbury and obtained a junior educational certificate. It was there that Sabata came to know his people, a nation of black people who were being oppressed by an all-white government, a nation who would one day look to him as their father, their provider, their defender and protector. Sabata had two cousins whose stories are closely linked with his own. One was Nelson Mandela, who also grew up in the village of Mqekezweni. In 1939, Nelson enrolled at the University of Fort Hare, where the third cousin, KZD Matanzima, was busy completing his law degree.
If you saw Nelson, you saw KD all the time. We moved around together. And that is the situation today. We still respect one another, but will not touch politics when we're together, because we differ diametrically insofar as politics are concerned.
The three Thembu cousins all went their own way. Sabata was preparing to take over the Thembu throne. Nelson moved to Johannesburg, where he joined the African National Congress. Kaiser returned to the Transkei and embarked on his own political career. He rose quickly through the ranks of the Bunga, an old colonial system which was still being used to govern South Africa's rural areas.
I joined the Bunga in order to destroy it. And I did in 1957. Yes, I differed completely from the ANC in that I was a supporter of the royalty, whereas the ANC supported a national organization which disregarded the position of the royalty.
Sabata was installed as the king of all the Thembu in 1952, 4 years after the National Party had come to power in South Africa. The king inherited a nation that was buckling under the pressures of apartheid. Bantu education, migrant labor, forced removals, loss of dignity, and all the other adverse effects of the system were turning his once proud nation into a colony of servants. Sabata soon earned himself a reputation as a king who carried a flame of hope for his people. The Thembu nation turned to him as their traditional leader, but his political ideology and his growing support began to threaten Kaiser, who had aligned himself with the apartheid system. The political rift between the two cousins was highlighted in 1957, when Sabata accompanied a Thembu delegation to Pretoria to protest against the Bantu Authorities legislation. The Thembus were angered by the legislation because it undermined the already limited power of their king and allowed a minor chief like Kaiser to gain political recognition.
So the Pretoria realized that this man is got a follow of Thembus. Let us weaken him by taking these areas away from him.
Idolophu ezine ngamabhulu, iXhosa, iCofimvaba, iCala, iLady Frank, kwathiwa mayingabizo zakhe, kwathathwa umnina wakhe wasekunene, wayintloko ngaphezu kwakhe.
This took place during the time when South African government decided to create the homelands. Now the South African government could go and establish the people who can work hand in gloves with him. So he has got a Kaiser who can work with the South African government. That is why Kaiser got this support from the South African government.
The South African government created a power base to back their supporter, Kaiser Matanzima. He was appointed as the paramount chief of so-called emigrant Thembuland, in fact, a collection of territories taken from Sabata's domain.
Now, the right hand of Mtikaga was the original Matanzima, the great-grandfather of Kaiser D. Matanzima. But all of these chiefs would have had right-hand sons, and the right hand of Mtikaga has no more seniority or no more independent power, really, than any other right-hand son in the entire Thembu genealogy.
ukumkanjomhlanga lo ungxolisa lo umntana womzala wethu obesolusela apha ekhaya lo Mthembu ke uyakhahlela nanku ungena ngegate ngoku ke ukhahle uthi ajomhlanga shulane khupha nenqawe ke phakamisa umnqwazi wakhe ubulisa ikumkani uthethe omncinci wethu lo ophaya ngaphesheya umzi wakhe nezihambi ke zalapha ekhaya zigalela idrink ebandayo umkani ke wayesanxibe i-morning gown ngisavuka ukusasa kuphuma inkomo kuphuma igusha esibayeni
abangathi uzabatha abangathi uzabatha
King Sabata married 4 wives, no Lindile, no Canada, no Kaya, and no Moscow. Because the Thembu nation paid the bride price for No Moscow, who is from the Pondo royal family, she was recognized by them as his great wife and the one who would produce an heir to the Thembu royal throne. In 1962, the next phase of the apartheid strategy was implemented. The kings and chiefs of the Transkei were summoned by the Bantu authorities to assist in the drawing up of a self-rule constitution. King Sabata went armed with a mandate from his people to oppose self-rule. He understood that self-rule was just another name for economic dependence on South Africa, and that the Transkei would become a pool of cheap labor at the disposal of the South African industrialists. But Sabata's words fell on deaf ears. The Transkei was granted self-rule. Kaiser Matanzima was appointed as the first chief minister.
The ANC went to King Sabata and said, look, you must establish an opposition to this which is going to be created by the South African government in the Transkei.
Chief Sabata waba ngumuntu wokuqala ukungavumi ukungena kunomkhogwadi worhulumente waseTranskei. Wabona kokuba uKatie Matanzima makamleke enzele kokuba akwazi uba abe nespace sokuphefumla kuba wayengaphefumli ngenxa kaComrade Sabata.
Sabata joined the Democratic Party, which was set up to oppose Kaiser's newly formed Transkei National Independence Party. The DP became the main target of Kaiser's oppressive techniques as he fought for political power. Its members were subject to continual harassment at the hands of Kaiser's police. They were detained without trial, they were banished from their areas of support, and some of their homes were razed to the ground. All over South Africa, opposition to the apartheid system was being effectively squashed by brute force. In Johannesburg, King Sabata's cousin, Nelson Mandela, together with 7 other ANC members, was on trial, charged with attempting to overthrow the South African government. Nelson was sentenced to life imprisonment.
Pressure was made on me as chief minister to have a motion discussed in the assembly requesting the Republican government to grant the Transkei complete sovereignty.
I can start it from 1976. The people here were promised all honey things, green pastures. The opposition, including the late King Sabata, were opposing that. They said, please, Honorable Chief Minister Matanzima, take this matter to the people for just their referendum and decision. What happened? The entire opposition was arrested. He went to the elections, Matanzima, in 1976, without the executive of the opposition.
They were dumped in jail. Here are they. All
in jail.
All in jail.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
We were all in jail, detained, so that we mustn't see what was taking place. According to the statement of Kate, he says, we don't want a freedom.
Amongst other things, he said, I will use Transkei as a base, not necessarily as a base, but as a platform to liberate my fellow black brothers who are oppressed in South Africa. But he didn't specify how.
In accordance with the apartheid plan, the Transkei became South Africa's first independent homeland. Kaiser Matanzima was installed as the first prime minister. His political power grew from strength to strength. In 1979, he was installed as the president of the Transkei, with his younger brother George replacing him as prime minister.
Will be reflected in its armed forces.
Despite Kaiser's political strength, King Sabata was still commanding a massive support. He was elected as the leader of the recently formed Democratic Progressive Party. More than ever before, he spoke out against the Matanzima regime. In July 1979, over a period of 14 days at various political meetings, King Sabata claimed, amongst other things, the following. He was born Kaiser Senior and would remain so forever. Kaiser visited Pretoria at the insistence of the white Boers and accepted independence on terms dictated by them. Kaiser was free, but his people weren't. Kaiser had an abundance of necessities, while his people had to live on shit. The Transkei educational system is corrupt and inferior. The Transkei passport is a valueless document. The Republic of the Transkei is a pigsty. According to the security police, King Sabata, in speaking out like he did, unlawfully calculated to violate the dignity or injure the reputation of the state president, a crime which the government regarded as high treason, punishable by death.
Watu Kaiser ambanombamba kuba uyandithuka. Ulowarisha idignity yam. This is state president. Unayo nangu.
King Sabata's arrest provoked immediate and widespread anger amongst his supporters. Thousands of Tembus gathered in Mthatha to demand his release. Support for Sabata flowed in from all over South Africa. The government was faced with a possible uprising against the king's imprisonment. 7 days later, Sabata was released on bail. 34 organizations were banned, and it was announced that the king's trial would be held in Port St. John's, a coastal resort outside the jurisdiction of Sabata's regional authority. In Port St. John's, the trial was postponed twice due to Sabata's failing health. He was suffering from diabetes. Eventually, 8 months later, King Sabata was found guilty of insulting the dignity of the state president. His case was then referred to the traditional Tembu authority, whose job was to pass sentence on their own king.
Now the word from the government, Matanzima's government, said to the kings and chiefs, to the region, in fact, discuss this matter of king, whether he should be expelled or suspended or fined.
It was not my government. It was Chief George's government. I was president.
At the end,
3 people who said Paramount Chief Comrade King, as he is known today, should be deposed.
I was expecting that Sabata would come forward, you see, for leniency and so on. Then I would deal with the matter as president and see him reinstated.
My father was deposed simply because, I would say first of all, he was against the independence of Transkei, which was obtained from Pretoria.
King Sabata Dalindyebo, the 18th heir to the Tembu royal throne, was removed from power. The flame of hope which he had been carrying for his people was all but extinguished. As though this denial of his birthright was not enough, King Sabata was still continuously harassed by Kaiser's police. He was powerless and desperate. At the break of dawn on August 10th, 1980, he quietly slipped away from his home at the royal place Bumbane, hidden in a bakery truck.
He left for Swaziland, and subsequently he landed in Lusaka in Zambia. So we couldn't actually contact him. There was no means of communication between him and us here at home. So I'm not even sure up till this day how he left the country. I was waiting that one day he will come back so that he can explain to us.
Namhlanje siyabuza kokuba kwathini na uComrade Chief Sabata alishiya ilizwe lokuzala lakowabo. Isizathu sinye kuba wayelekwa ngumuntu owayesithi uligazi lakhe umntakwabo. Kuba kaloku kukho into ingxaki kwi-homeland leaders. Sinengxaki nge-homeland leaders. Sileqwa ngamabhulu eSouth Africa. Sithi siyagoduka sibalekela apho sizalwa khona. Siphathwe ngobuhlungu. Masenze ntoni na ke kambe? Linye ikhaya yiLusaka.
Waphuma amaphepha athi undijoyinile i-ANC ngoba anandawo ubalekela. Isizathu soba ndibe lapha bendibaleka kuba ndibona intlalo yami ibuhlungu ekhaya. Awuba eyijoyinileke i-ANC eyijoyine ndiqonda uba yena bengasimiselanga uyijoyina into enayo ebehambisana nomthetho lowo nalaa nto bayenzayo ye-ANC kuba ubona imbophelelo le esikuyo ngexesha esikuyo ngalo. Emveni koko ke ezosweleka nje ke engakhange siphinde simbone.
Once he was in exile, King Sabata found himself among strangers in a foreign country and began to long for his people and his home. He was heartbroken and bitter, and the diabetes began to take its toll on him.
He was not in a good state of health. He was always sick. So I understand he was given a position in the movement, but although it was not in the national executive.
Nokokuba ngaba bakuyiphina imeko abantu bakowethu nakulo mibhiyozo bathi xa bebila bekhensa bevuyisana nam kuba ingumhla ukuzalwa kwam ze bazi into yokokubana ndisecaleni kwabo. Naxa ndilapha asikuba ndibabalekile ndingasukuba ndibafulathele into ena kungenxa yokubaleka intshutshiso. Ndikhumbula namhlanje atsho xa ndandifika apha ndisithi kubhetele kwamnandi lapha kunento bana ndibone amanyundululu nenhlalo ehlelwe ngabantu bakowethu. Nditshona kuni mapolisa, nditshona kuni majoni kuba ngoyihlo aba kuthiwa babulaleni nabantakwenu. Nivimela ntoni nixokiswa nguKaiser, nixokiswa ngoomathanzima bethi bulalani abantu akwenu noyihlo ngenxa into yobana kusithiwa nikhululekile. Nikhululeke njani?
In April 1986, after 6 years in exile, King Sabata died. His body was flown back to the Transkei, where his family had made arrangements for his funeral. Little had changed in the Transkei since Sabata had left. Even though Kaiser had resigned from government amidst allegations of corruption, he was still enjoying political and financial power. The country was being governed by his brother, George, and it became obvious that Kaiser's personal vendetta against King Sabata was not over.
A night before the funeral, we had to go to the Supreme Court. We were challenging certain things that were certain manners in which the proceeding was going to be conducted. We noticed that it was going to be thing of the state, thing of the government. So we had to challenge it, because how can your enemy be the person who's going to bury you? Obviously, you're not going to get a proper funeral. So we won the case. The Supreme Court ordered that no one must touch the corpse of the late Comrade King.
So I told the Prime Minister that I'm the senior member of the family, and I had no such an order.
Kaiser went to the undertaker's place, that is Gwiliza, and said to him, look, I want to see my brother. And Gwiliza said, look, you are not in a position. Here is affidavit. People who are to get the body, it's Wielekaya and Moscow. It's where he said, no, it's my brother, I want to see.
Baphakamisa ndithe xa ndibheke emnyango savakala isithonga kwangathi kulahlwa amatye amakhulu amabini isithonga sokulahlwa kwebhoksi kaSabatha ngamapolisa elahla evenini kule 4-wheel drive kwathi nje gadla kwangathi kuyibhoki ilitye bemlahla nje kanje evenini.
He was buried by his enemies. Understand 80% of the people who were there in the first funeral, they were either people who were followers of Matanzima, police, and security officers. So that was not our funeral, it was their funeral.
Siyazi sonke into kokuba lamhla wayefihlwa okokuqala kwakufana nokungathi kuqhusekwa isisu esiphumileyo emhlabeni.
King Sabata was buried in a pauper's grave, in a graveyard usually reserved for women. It was Kaiser Matanzima's final insult. Little did Kaiser realize that the hope which King Sabata had inspired in thousands of people would not be buried so easily. The Transkei continued to run the Matanzima way for another 1.5 years. Then, on New Year's Day 1988, in a dramatic turn of events, the army, led by General Bantu Holomisa, forced George and most of his cabinet to resign. Ms. Stella Sitawu was elected as the new Prime Minister, but 86 days later, she too was removed from power by General Holomisa.
Earlier this year, it came to the attention of the Transkei Defence Force that bribery and corruption was rife in government ranks in our country. The TDF decided to take action against the affected ministers. The TDF has resolved to take over full control of the country.
And now we were a little bit worried about South Africa as well, as to what must we do.
The members of the new military council who are running the country are responsible people. They are loyal to Transkei, and they are also friends of South Africa.
Most people felt that the military coup was another blow to possible freedom in the Transkei region. It was presumed that the South African government was behind the coup, and many people believe that Kaiser was also involved.
When I took over fully knowing that I will be labeled with all sorts of names. And but the soldiers said, General, these are our objectives, 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'm just on the program.
He probably has joined different political views from mine.
The opposition to our country so far has been identified, and it's none other than the ex-state president, Chief K.D. Matanzima.
Does he say so? I didn't know that. I'm happy to know. If he says that, I'm recognized as Transkeian enemy number 1. I never knew that at all.
It had been 3 years since King Sabata had died. His family had been evicted from the great place Bumbani, and it was now deserted and vandalized. The royal throne was unjustly occupied by Zondo Mtikhaga, the son of Sabata's half-brother, Bambilanga Dalindyebo, who had been installed by Kaiser as the new king of the Thembu. In the light of the new political climate created by General Holomisa, King Sabata's family decided on a course of action which they hoped would re-establish the legitimate royal throne. They approached the general in order to gain his assistance.
They said, please, you said you came here to make things right. It's one of the problems which you must put into your shoulders. This is the one.
Kabiyele khaya umkhosi bawela ngakuye uzondo wakho.
Everybody was satisfied because their wishes, their objectives, their thinking were tested in a court of law.
But there can only be one king, and that is the direct line beginning with the original Thembu through Ngubengcuka Mtikhaga right down to Sabata and his son now, Buyelekhaya.
Buyelekhaya, King Sabata's first son of his great wife Nomosko, was officially recognized as the king of the Thembu nation. In order to completely reinstate the dignity which had been stolen from King Sabata, arrangements were made to exhume his body from the pauper's grave, and a funeral was planned. A funeral that would prove worthy of a great monarch, a funeral that would rekindle the fire of hope that Sabata had once carried for the Thembu nation. King Sabata Dalindyebo was coming home.
Decided that on that specific date there will be a funeral of that nature, and there will be people carrying their flags. Contralesa will carry their flag. They will speak. Holomisa will speak there. The paramount chiefs will speak there. That's a God's program, and I've got nothing to do. And I'm not the right one to change it.
I was annoyed about it. It was a real insult on me as a senior member of the tribe. Never consulted about it. So I kept away.
It is a time where the people, they've decided that, look, we must stand up and fight for our rights.
So it was a moving funeral, something great. And many people in Transkei, they've never tasted such an occasion. It wasn't, in fact, even a funeral to most of us. It was a political rally. I don't mind calling it like that because really most people were revived there.
Kodwa sihlangene nje namhlanje kuyisisikhathi lapho abantu baseMzantsi Afrika bathathe isinqumo, bathathe isigqibo sokuthi izinhlangano zethu siyozivula, asiyocela permission kubo. Sukela namhlanje siza kusebenzisana kunye nobantu olomisa. Sukela namhlanje ukusukela namhlanje siyakusebenza nazo zonke i-chiefs ezithi zijoyine iCongrelesa. Ngabona abantu esawusebenza nabo abo. We are not going to work with the puppet chiefs. We are not going to work with those chiefs who are victimizing and exploiting our people. What we are saying, we will only work with all the progressive chiefs. Amanda! Amanda!
Sibabuze abantu balapha kule ngingqi sikuyo okokuba nanku undonakele efika kusithi ingaba nifuna ukuthini na, in other words sakuyibiza i-referendum. Ndiphelile apho sikuyo.
Tukini nyamazan hiya maruma haruma hiya maruma asijab. The ousting of the Matanzima regime was only a beginning. What is central is the ousting of the SADF and the ousting of FW de Klerk. That this very same army that has ousted Matanzima must oust de Klerk.
King Sabata Dalindyebo was buried at the Bumbane Great Place on the 1st of October 1989. The funeral has been recognized as the turning point of political history in the Transkei region. Most of the 40,000 people who attended the funeral had never been witness to such freedom of expression before. At the time of the funeral, a wave of liberation was rising throughout South Africa. 3 months after the funeral, King Sabata's cousin, Nelson Mandela, was released from jail.
Viva!